Is reality all just one big simulation? Well, some big names like Neil deGrasse Tyson, Elon Musk, and many more think it's a very possible that we are. So let's get into it. Neil deGrasse Tyson, one of the most charismatic scientists since Bill Nye. He thinks that there's a very good chance we could be living in a simulation. In fact, he thinks it's about a 50-50 chance. All of this could be one big simulation sitting on someone's hard drive. When Tyson was asked about us possibly living in a simulation of some kind, he said, quote, "I think the likelihood may be very high." Then he noted the massive gap between human and chimpanzee intelligence despite how much DNA we share with each other. 98%, just so you know. So in the vastness of space, there could be some other beings far, far more superior to us in every conceivable way. Tyson went on to say we would be drooling, blithering idiots in their presence. If that's the case, it is easy for me to imagine that everything in our lives is just a creation of some other entity for their entertainment.
Some philosophers, like Nick Bostrom, have cooked up a theory that feels like it can't be real, but it is actually taken quite seriously by some scientists. They say there's a high chance that we are living in a simulation. Bostrom argues that one of these three scenarios is probably true. First, that extinction is the norm. Almost all civilizations out there, like ours, never make it past a certain point. They wipe themselves out or get destroyed before they can really get advanced technology. It's a little bit terrifying, right? Imagine countless civilizations reaching the brink of greatness only to fall into the abyss of extinction. It's like cosmic Russian roulette. The second scenario is that no one's playing games. The advanced civilizations that do make it decide running simulations of their past, like their own version of super advanced ancestry.com, is boring or pointless. So they don't bother creating these massive virtual worlds to see what their ancestors were like. The third scenario is that this is all make-believe. Definitely the scariest of the scenarios, that we are actually living in a giant computer game right now. That our entire universe with its stars, planets, and morning coffee is just some super advanced alien software running on a cosmic computer. So why is this unsettling? Well, if we're in a simulation, then who's controlling it? What happens if they decide to hit the off switch? It's like being a character in someone else's video game, and it makes you wonder, are our choices really our own, or are we just following the pre-written code of some cosmic programmer? This theory gives a whole new meaning to the question, what is reality? And honestly, it's a little bit spooky when you really think about it. It is possible that a team of scientists conducted an experiment that found proof that we are living in a simulated universe. Back in 2017, these scientists at the University of Washington totally shook up the scientific world when they proved that they could sneak computer code into real human DNA. If you're like me, you're probably wondering why on earth they would need to ever do that, and the answer is to expose a vulnerability in gene sequencing computers. But by showing that our biological building blocks could be hacked, just like computer code, they may have accidentally opened up Pandora's box. By showing that our DNA can be hacked like a computer code, they may have shown something that is straight out of the Matrix. Maybe what we thought was our biological reality is actually just zeros. It's basically like finding out that we're living in a super advanced simulation where DNA isn't just the stuff of life, it's the stuff of code.
Max Tegmark is a physicist at MIT who's written a couple papers on simulation theory, one in 2014 entitled "Is the Universe a Simulation?" and another that came out just a couple years ago called "Detecting Structures in Universe Simulations," which he wrote along with postdoctoral researcher at the University of Copenhagen, Hans Olaf Kold. Max Tegmark believes that our universe can all be broken down mathematically, and that even reality itself is part of a mathematical structure. Now, he outlined this in his 2014 book, Our Mathematical Universe. So Tegmark thinks that these mathematical structures could essentially be similar to the type of code we see used in, say, video games. A simulation. In Tegmark's own words, if I were a character in a computer game, I would also discover eventually that the rules seemed completely rigid and mathematical. Alright, if this first case doesn't make you question reality just a bit, then I'm not sure what will. Anthony Hopkins had just landed the leading role in the movie adaptation The Girl from Petrovka by George Pfeiffer. Wanting to start research and familiarize himself with the character, he did what any good actor would do and decided to read the damn book. He went to London and sifted through a number of bookstores, but none of them had the novel he was looking for. Eventually, Hopkins decided he had to just head back home, but while waiting at a subway station, he happened to spot a book on a bench. Curious, he picked it up and was thrilled to realize that it was a copy of The Girl from Petrovka. I mean, what are the chances of that? Inside the book were a bunch of scribbled notes, but that was fine, it would have to do. Well, 2 years later, Hopkins was filming in Vienna, and the book's author, George Pfeiffer, visited the set one day. Hopkins struck up a conversation with Pfeiffer, who ended up telling the actor that he'd lost his own copy of his book, having given it to a friend who'd lost it somewhere in London. Hopkins was stunned to realize that the book he'd found in the London subway was the author's very own copy, filled with his handwritten notes.
Next up, we have the historic fact that it's not actually possible to prove that we are not, in fact, living in a simulation. While nuclear physicist Zora Davuti claims that we must not be living in a simulation because if we were, cosmic rays, highly energetic particles traveling through space at a speed approaching light speed, would appear as pixels rather than unbending beams. But this theory is quickly undermined when you take the words of NYU philosopher David Chalmers into account, who said that you're not going to get proof that we're not in a simulation because any evidence that we are not could be simulated. It's a paradox. But it doesn't end there. If you want to take the scientific route to disprove Davuti's definitive claim rather than the philosophical one, you can do that too. Because apparently we have already determined our universe's pixel size, and it's a Planck length, spelled Planck, which is 10 to the power of negative 20 times the size of a proton. It's really small. And it's also the point at which concepts of time and gravity no longer apply, which leads us to the conclusion that if the world is in fact a simulation, it is made up of a countless number of Planck length pixels. Forget 4K, we're living in 400.
Scientists first found it in the 70s, but it's believed to have been sealed off by 3 kilometers or about 2 miles of ice for around 15 million years. At one point, Lake Vostok was pretty much a regular lake on the surface of Antarctica, and it would rise and fall with the tides, just like any other body of water, but now it's deep beneath the ice with a crazy amount of pressure, about 5,150 pounds per square inch, just sitting there in total darkness. Even though it's buried under all that ice, scientists are convinced that there's life down there. They think organisms have been evolving in complete isolation, untouched by the outside world for all of this time. How they're still thriving in that dark, high-pressure environment is a mystery, and while it'd be wild to see what the lake would have looked like in the past, I'm also dying to know what kind of weird life forms could be living down there right now. Next up, we have Elon Musk. A man so incredibly smart, yet so incredibly dumb at the same time. It's weird. Anyway, we're not here to talk about Elon Musk himself really, but his theory on a simulated world. Let's get into that. The CEO of SpaceX and Tesla himself really believes that we are indeed living in a simulation. He's talked about this on the Joe Rogan podcast and press conferences, and unlike the other folks on this list who just theorize about it and think it could be a possibility, Musk is like 99.9% sure, stating that there's a quote 1 in a billion chance we're in based reality. So just a little less on the fence than Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example.
Next, we are talking about the second law of infodynamics. So a physicist studying the mutations of the SARS-CoV-2 virus has stirred up quite the conversation with claims that hint we might be living in a simulated universe. Dr. Melvin Vopson, the scientist behind these claims, introduces, quote, the second law of infodynamics, suggesting that mutations in the virus aren't random, but follow this new law. He's found that information entropy, a measure of disorder from an information perspective, decreases over time in these mutations, opposing what we see with typical entropy, which increases. This discovery is more than just a quirky observation. Vopson argues it could flip our understanding of evolution on its head and even hint at a universe that's more orderly and deterministic than we thought. He connects this to the idea that the universe might be a giant simulation, designed with data optimization to minimize computational needs. In his studies, particularly with the ever-mutating SARS-CoV-2, Vopson has observed patterns that he believes can't be dismissed as random. He suggests that if we start viewing genetic mutations deterministically, we could potentially predict mutations before they happen, which could revolutionize genetic therapies and vaccine development. However, the physics community is still skeptical, and more research is needed to test these very bold ideas. Vopson's theory, while intriguing, remains on the fringe, and proving it might involve experiments that check if information itself has mass, a concept that could tie back to everything from the heat death of the universe to why symmetry is so common in nature. So while the second law of infodynamics opens up fascinating possibilities, it is a long road from hypothesis to accepted science, especially with claims this big. But who knows? Sometimes the strangest ideas lead to the most profound discoveries.
How do you explain all the unexplained things people have been claiming to experience since pretty much the dawn of time? That's a bizarre sentence. Doors slamming on their own, phantom footsteps, apparitions. Well, people will either say it was a ghost, and then non-believers scoff. But they don't really have much of an explanation of their own other than some form of your brain was playing some sort of trick on you. Is that really the best explanation that we can come up with, though? That we're just hearing or seeing things that aren't really there? Maybe there's a meatier explanation, something with a little more substance. Maybe paranormal experiences are actually glitches in the Matrix. Those translucent figures people have seen in old buildings wearing old Victorian era clothing could be the computer just glitching, showing a brief flash of something that's already happened. Same thing with the phantom sounds like footsteps or laughter or fart. Why do we never hear ghost farts? You know what I mean? It's always footsteps, laughter, creepy stuff, but it's never anything funny.
Abraham Lincoln and JFK have some uncanny similarities, and it freaks me out. They were both elected to Congress 100 years apart in 1846 and 1946 respectively. They both became president 14 years later in 1860, 1960, and both died by a fatal gunshot wound to the head, and were succeeded by a man named Johnson who, wouldn't you know, just so happened to be born 100 years apart. Add to that some other coincidences like them dying on a Friday, their family names containing 7 letters, and the fact that they were both famous for their civil rights efforts, and you've got 2 presidents cut from an eerily similar cloth. So what does this mean? I don't know, but it sure is freaky.
The Mandela effect began being widely recognized when people began to swear that they could remember Nelson Mandela passing away in the 1980s. This is of course weird since he actually passed away in 2013. This is obviously a huge time discrepancy, so people were very confused. This is of course how it got the name the Mandela effect, and it basically is the theory that whoever is responsible for this simulation we live in has gone back and changed some things. There is an alternate belief that the Mandela effect shows that there are multiple universes or alternate realities, and this is just a result of us crossing from one to another. Other really famous cases of the Mandela effect are the Bernstein bears, where some people swear it used to be spelled with the ending being S-T-E-I-N, while all copies are now spelled S-T-A-I-N. Or the popular peanut butter brand called Jif, there are people who swear it used to be called Jiffy. This one, however, is my personal favorite. There are people who remember there being a movie called Shazam where Sinbad played a genie. A lot of people speculate, though, that they are just getting it mixed up with a movie where Shaq played a genie called Kazam. I definitely remember the Bernstein Bears one and the Shazam one, so I just might be a believer that this all really is a simulation.
This person recounted their story of how their school seemed to suddenly change. They started a new school just a few years ago and remember exploring the school for the first time. They have a clear memory of walking up a flight of stairs to get to the second floor, seeing 2 water fountains to the left and the bathrooms to the right. They didn't return there for a while as it was on the opposite end of their classroom and they had no need to go there. The next school year they walked down to that end of the school again and realized that the staircase was nowhere to be found and there was no second floor at all, merely a blank wall remaining where the stairs had been. He wasn't the only one to remember it either, a few of his other friends having memories of the second floor. There was also no record or evidence of the second floor having potentially been demolished in that time, a potential glitch in the matrix putting a staircase where there had never actually been one.
The twins named Jim. Okay, that sounds like a 2026 comedy hit already. Back in 1979, a set of twins were reunited when they were 39 years old at the time. This was of course a big moment in their lives. For 37 years, they barely knew of each other's existence. Then when they finally met, the long-lost twins had more in common than they could have ever thought. For starters, both had been named Jim. I spoiled that in the fun title earlier. But their adoptive parents both named the lads Jim. That's insane. Jim? Like of all names, really? And both Jims just happened to love math and carpentry. Both also had jobs and security. And both also had ex-wives named Linda. And they both since married a woman named Betty. This isn't like, what? Imagine meeting another you, and he's like, oh yeah, I also love knitting and Autobots. What are the odds? No, that's too eerie. You're an alien clone. Something's afoot here. Get out of here. Not just meeting a long-lost twin at 40. No way. The Hoover Dam, okay, this massive accomplishment. Its first victim, sadly, was a man named J.G. Tierney. It was December 20th, 1922, and the official death toll from industrial accidents during the construction of the dam from 1921 to 1935 was sadly around the 200 number. It was a lot of deaths, so it was pretty sad. The earliest and latest victims of the construction were both father and son. And if that's not coincidence enough, both of them died on the exact same day. They both passed on December 20th. J.G. Tierney sadly drowned while conducting surveys in the Colorado River, and then 13 years later, Patrick Tierney fell off an intake tower right before construction was complete.
Over the years, we've spent billions of dollars trying to get to outer space and trying to find signs of extraterrestrial life or any past lives on other planets. Despite all of our best efforts, we haven't been able to find any aliens. This theory goes that the reason we haven't been able to find aliens is either because they're the ones running the simulation in the first place, or it's possible that if they are part of the simulation, they may be more advanced than us and have possibly found a way to escape. It's also possible that maybe the computer just doesn't have enough RAM to simulate another planet's civilization. This is all to say that maybe if we were able to find aliens, then we'd finally get the answers that we're looking for.
In physics' famous double-slit experiments, electrons are fired at a photosensitive screen through slits in a copper plate, usually producing an interference pattern that indicates wave-like behavior. Now, this type of experiment was first performed by Thomas Young in 1801 as a demonstration of the wave behavior of visible light. Now, at the time, it was thought that the light consisted of either waves or particles, but with the beginning of modern physics about 100 years later, it was realized that light could in fact show behavior characteristics of both waves and particles. Some have taken this to mean our simulation is conserving its resources and rendering certain things only when it knows we're looking at them. So does this mean anything? I'm not sure, but it is something to consider.
This person described their glitch in the Matrix, also thinking it possible that they may have fallen into a parallel universe. Him and a close friend were working on a creative project together, and they met each week at the same restaurant to go over the progress and discuss their work. The restaurant they always visited had a wall that was lined with jars of Caesar dressing and vodka sauce, knowing that these were the exact things on the wall as they would examine them and even read out the calorie contents. Their father then passed away, and in an attempt to get back to normal, he decided to meet up with the friend at the restaurant again the week after. But when he got there, he realized that the walls were now lined with jars of Caesar dressing and tomato soup instead of vodka sauce. While they could have just swapped them out, he says he asked the staff and they said they had never had vodka sauce on the wall. The person believing that the shock of their father's death caused them to experience a glitch in the Matrix.
It's weird how similar some of your neighbors are, right? Like growing up, we had 3 Davids on our street. They all loved cutting their lawn at 7 a.m. What a coincidence, right? We all hated them. What a coincidence. Well, the 60s rock icon Jimi Hendrix and the 18th century composer George Friedrich Handel, they were both neighbors. A couple hundred years apart, but they were both neighbors indeed. They lived in 23 Brook Street and 25 Brook Street in London. What are the odds, right? Had George had been born 200 years later, we would have gotten the greatest collab of all time. Yeah, if you're local, of course you'll know there's a site there now. It's a famous landmark, but in terms of coincidences, there's music in the air on Brook Street. Something's going on. Kind of want to walk by and see if I'm better at playing the flute. Maybe I can play the flute on that block, who knows. Time is relative and fascinating and all that confusing stuff. There's so many components of our universe that we still don't even understand. James Webb is out here making people turn to atheists all of a sudden. The universe is bigger than we all think, yet somehow it still gives us these once-in-a-lifetime coincidences. Or as I say, coincidence. Stephen Hawking's death occurred on Einstein's 139th birthday, which is also Galileo's 300th death day, and also Pi Day. This was March 14th. My dad has the same birthday as Daniel Radcliffe, and they're both wizards, so I don't know. Just saying. These birthday coincidences are getting out of hand. Coincidences, coincidences, coincidences. There it is, he's got it.